I paid for my sister-in-law's entire wedding, the venue, the flowers, the catering, the open bar, and when I arrived at the reception, my name wasn't on the seating chart. My mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "Just find a spot at the bar, honey. You're practically staff anyway." So I did find a spot, right next to the venue manager, where I quietly canceled the auto pay on every insurance policy attached to my husband's family, all 6 of them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how I got there first. My name isn't important. What's important is that 2 years ago, I was the kind of woman who said yes to everything. Yes to lending money. Yes to covering bills. Yes to showing up early and leaving late. My therapist, the one I eventually started seeing after all of this, called it compulsive accommodation. I called it being a good wife. Turns out those two things are not the same. I met my husband, Brennan, at a work conference in Denver. He was charming in that easy, unguarded way that makes you think you finally found someone uncomplicated. He laughed at the right moments. He called when he said he would. He remembered small things, like the fact that I took my coffee with oat milk and hated the sound of televisions left on in empty rooms. For the first year, he was the best thing that had happened to me in a long time. What I didn't fully see until much later was that Brennan came pre-packaged with a family dynamic that I was never going to fit into, no matter how hard I tried. His mother, Rochelle, was the kind of woman who maintained an iron grip on her household through the specific weaponry of softness. Sighs, wounded looks, comments delivered with a gentle smile that somehow cut straight through you. His younger sister, Becca, was 24, perpetually between jobs, and treated like a porcelain doll that might shatter if anyone expected anything of her. And his father, Walt, was a retired electrician who'd been emotionally checked out since somewhere around 2003, and mostly sat in his recliner, watching fishing documentaries and nodding at whatever Rochelle said. I was the outsider. That part I understood from the beginning. What I didn't understand was that outsider in this family meant something very specific. It meant useful but invisible. It meant the person who solved problems and wrote checks and then got quietly moved to the edge of every photograph. Brennan and I had been married for 3 years when Becca announced her engagement to a man named Scott, who I'm fairly certain had never held a job for more than 18 months, but had very nice hair and a boat his uncle let him borrow on weekends. The moment Rochelle heard the word wedding, she turned to me, not to Brennan, to me. "You're so good at organizing things," she said, squeezing my hand across the kitchen table. "You know how these things work. You could make it so special for her." What she meant was, "You're going to plan this wedding, and while we're at it, you're probably going to pay for most of it too." She wasn't wrong. Over the following 8 months, I became the de facto wedding planner, florist liaison, caterer coordinator, and financial backstop for a wedding that was supposed to be small and intimate, and ended up being 112 people at a rented vineyard in the Willamette Valley. I put $42,000 on my business credit card, money I had built up over 6 years of running a freelance UX consulting business from my spare bedroom, working through weekends, canceling vacations, saying no to myself over and over so I could say yes to clients and deadlines. Brennan said we'd work out the repayment as a family. That phrase, I would come to learn, meant nothing. Here's what I told myself to get through it. I told myself this was an investment in our marriage, that Rochelle would soften toward me once she saw how much I'd given, that Becca would finally treat me like a real sister-in-law instead of a convenient resource, that Brennan would see, concretely, how much I loved him and his family, and that it would matter. I told myself a lot of things in those 8 months. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September. The vineyard was genuinely beautiful, golden light coming through the oak trees, tables draped in ivory linen. Flower arrangements I had spent 3 weeks coordinating with a florist in Portland. I had chosen every detail. The champagne tower was my idea. The quartet that played during the ceremony was a group I'd seen perform at a corporate event I'd organized 2 years prior and had remembered because their sound was exactly right for an outdoor evening reception. I had put myself into every corner of that day. I wore a navy midi dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Not the mother of the bride dress. Obviously, not the maid of honor dress. Becca had given that role to her college roommate, which was fine. genuinely fine. I was not the kind of person who needed a title. I just wanted to be present, to be seen, to sit at a table with my husband's family and feel, for once, like I belonged there. I arrived at the reception venue 40 minutes after the ceremony ended. I had stayed behind briefly to tip the officiant, something no one else had thought to do, and then driven separately because Brennan had ridden in the wedding party car and we hadn't coordinated a return plan. A small thing. I didn't mind. The vineyard's reception hall had a seating chart displayed on an antique easel near the entrance. Long ivory cards, calligraphy, my own handwriting on some of them from the proofing stage. I scanned the list for my name. It wasn't there. I went through it twice. The hall was filling up around me, guests moving past in clusters of perfume and laughter, finding their tables, hugging people they hadn't seen in years. I stood at that easel for probably 3 full minutes, reading every name on every table, and mine was simply not there. I found Rochelle near the head table, adjusting the placement of a centerpiece I had ordered. She looked up when she saw me, and something passed across her face. Not quite guilt, more like mild inconvenience. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "There's just so many people. We ran out of space at the family tables, you know how it is. You can just find a spot at the cocktail bar. It's so cozy over there. You're practically one of the staff anyway, you know everything about how this place runs." She laughed lightly, like she'd said something charming. "Besides, Brennan's at table 3 if you want to pull a chair over later." Pull a chair over. I looked at her. I looked at the head table where Becca was already seated in her dress, luminous and laughing, next to Scott with his nice hair. I looked at table 3, where Brennan was deep in conversation with his cousin, not looking for me, not wondering where I was. $42,000, 8 months of weekends, $42,000. "Of course," I said. "I'll find somewhere." I did not pull a chair up to table 3. I walked to the bar, ordered a sparkling water with lime, and stood there for a moment with my hand wrapped around the cold glass, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter and more final than anger. Like a door closing very softly in a room far away. The cocktail area was near the venue's administrative office, a small glass-walled room where I'd met with the event coordinator, a warm, efficient woman named Teresa, at least 4 times in the planning process. Teresa was still there, laptop open, running quiet logistics in the background the way good venue coordinators always do. She waved at me when she saw me standing by the bar, and I waved back, and then I walked over. "Long day?" she asked. "Getting longer," I said. Here is the thing about being the person who plans everything. You know where all the paperwork is. I had set up the vendor payment accounts for this wedding through a business management platform I use for my own clients. The insurance policies: health, dental, vision for Brennan, Rochelle, Walt, and 2 supplemental policies Brennan had added for his parents when Walt's cholesterol came back high 18 months ago, were all auto-drafted from a joint account that I funded. I had set them up. My login, my email, my financial architecture. I opened my phone. I navigated to the insurance platform. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I didn't cancel anything yet. I want to be clear about that. What I did was pause. I sat with the phone in my hand and thought, with the specificity of someone who had spent the last 8 months in spreadsheets and logistics, about what I actually knew. I knew that I was not on the seating chart of my sister-in-law's wedding, which I had paid for. I knew that Brennan, when I'd brought up the topic of repayment 3 months ago, had said we'll figure it out, and then changed the subject to a fishing trip his dad wanted to take. I knew that the joint account had been steadily depleted over the past year by transfers I had mostly attributed to family stuff, a category I had been too trusting to interrogate. I made myself wait until after dinner to look at the bank statements on my phone. I sat at the cocktail bar and ate the appetizers that a waiter brought by on a tray, the same appetizers I had selected from a tasting menu in June, and I scrolled through 6 months of transactions in the joint account. The pattern, once I saw it, was obvious. Regular transfers every 2 to 4 weeks, ranging from $800 to $3,000, all going to a Venmo account I didn't recognize. Over 6 months, the total was just over $19,000. I texted my college roommate from the bar. She's a CPA in Chicago. She picked up on the second ring even though it was a Saturday. I need you to help me understand something, I said quietly, and I need you to not react dramatically because I'm in the middle of a wedding right now and I cannot cry. She helped me understand it very clearly. The transfers were going to an account registered to a name I recognized. It was Becca's boyfriend's name from before Scott, an ex. Someone who had reportedly lent Becca a significant amount of money years ago before I was in the picture. Someone Rochelle had apparently decided needed to be quietly paid off before the wedding so the past didn't resurface. Someone they had paid off with money from an account I had been filling, without telling me it was being used for that, without asking. My roommate said very calmly, "You need to talk to a lawyer before you say anything to anyone." I said, "I know." I hung up and sat there for a moment listening to the string quartet, my string quartet, the one I'd booked, playing something soft and pretty while 112 people ate a dinner I had funded, and Becca danced with Scott, and Rochelle accepted compliments about what a beautiful wedding it was. I didn't make a scene. I want to be clear about that too. I am not a scene maker by nature. What I am is methodical. It's what makes me good at my job. It's what had made me so useful to this family for so long. I paused the auto pay on all 6 insurance policies. I scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney for the following Monday. And then I went and sat down next to Brennan at table 3, smiled at his cousin, and ate my salmon. "You okay?" Brennan asked at one point in a low voice. "I'm figuring some things out," I said. He nodded like that was a normal answer and turned back to his conversation. The following 2 weeks were the quietest kind of chaos. On the outside, nothing had happened. We came home from the wedding weekend. Brennan went back to work. I went back to work. I met with the attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s who took 11 pages of notes and told me I had more leverage than I realized. The house was in both our names, but the business accounts, my business, were entirely mine. The joint account contributions were documentable and traceable. The insurance policies were in my name, she said. Before you do anything, we need to understand what he knew. That was the question I couldn't answer yet. Did Brennan know about the transfers? Had he approved them? Had he been protecting his family at my expense? Or had he been protected from the truth himself? I gave myself one conversation to find out. I picked a Sunday morning after coffee, before the day got complicated. I sat across from him at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the bank statements pulled up, and I told him I needed him to look at something with me. No accusation in my voice. Just the facts of the thing. He looked at the transfers. I watched his face. What I saw was not the face of a man who had known. What I saw was the face of a man who was piecing something together very quickly and didn't like the shape it was making. His jaw tightened. He scrolled up, scrolled down. He said, "Wait," twice, quietly, to himself. "Did you know about these?" I asked. "No," he said, and then after a pause, "But I think I know who did." The conversation with Rochelle happened 3 days later. Brennan arranged it. I did not attend, because the attorney had advised me not to be in the room for anything that might later become a statement. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop 2 blocks away and waited. Brennan called me 40 minutes after he went inside. "She knew," he said. His voice was flat in a way I hadn't heard before. "She said it was a family matter and she didn't think it needed to involve you." $19,000 didn't need to involve me. She said you had plenty. There it was, the whole architecture of it in 5 words. You have plenty. The same logic that had made me useful and invisible for 3 years. The same math that had left my name off the seating chart at a wedding I'd written the check for. I said, "I need you to understand something. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about what it means that she thought that was acceptable." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going to do anything dramatic," I said. "I'm going to be very calm and very clear." The insurance policies lapsed. I had given 30 days notice through the platform, which meant there was a window. Plenty of time for everyone to find alternative coverage if they chose to act on the letters that had been mailed to the billing address on file, which was Rochelle and Walt's house. I later learned those letters had been received and set aside unopened, because Rochelle had assumed it was a billing error that I would sort out. I did not sort it out. What I sorted out was the repayment agreement drafted by my attorney, sent via certified mail to my mother-in-law's address, and copied to Brennan. It itemized the wedding expenses I had covered, the joint account contributions over the prior 18 months, and the $19,000 in unauthorized transfers. The total, with the legal preparation fees added, came to $66,000. The letter gave 30 days to respond before we pursued formal recovery. Rochelle called me the evening the letter arrived. She did not call Brennan, she called me directly. "I cannot believe you would do this to our family," she said. Her voice was shaking, but not with grief, with fury. "After everything we've done for you, we welcomed you, we brought you in, we treated you like a daughter." I let her finish. "Rochelle," I said, "you didn't seat me at the wedding." Silence. "I paid for that wedding," I said, "and I stood at the bar because there wasn't a chair with my name on it. I want you to think about that." She hung up. The family gathering happened 4 days later at Rochelle and Walt's house, a pre-planned birthday dinner for Walt that had been on the calendar for weeks. Brennan and I debated whether to go. I said I wanted to go. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts wariness and something close to respect. "Okay," he said. "Whatever you need." I dressed carefully, not armor, exactly, just myself, put together, wearing the watch my grandmother left me. I brought a birthday card for Walt with a gift card to Bass Pro Shops because he genuinely liked fishing and he was, in many ways, not the problem. When we arrived, the tension was immediate. Becca and Scott were already there. Becca avoided eye contact. Scott shook Brennan's hand like nothing was wrong, which told me everything I needed to know about his situational awareness. Rochelle busied herself in the kitchen. Walt greeted me warmly, the way he always did, because Walt operated in a separate atmosphere from everyone else. We sat down to dinner. For the first 20 minutes, it was an exercise in surface-level normalcy. Someone commented on the weather. Someone mentioned a show they were watching. Walt talked about a fishing trip he was planning for spring. Then Rochelle set down her fork. "I think we need to clear the air," she said. She looked around the table, gathering audience. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about some financial matters, and I don't want it to affect this family." She was going to do it. She was going to frame it, give her version before I could give mine. I let her start. I watched her describe the transfers as bridging a family situation. Watched her describe the wedding contributions as graciously offered. Watched her look at Becca and smile the smile of a woman who believed she had already won this conversation. When she paused, I said, "Can I add something?" She blinked. "Of course." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, screen up, the document app already open. I had prepared a simple one-page summary. Just the numbers, dates, amounts, account references. Clean and factual, the way I'd learned to present information to clients who didn't want to deal with complexity. "I want to make sure everyone's working from the same information," I said. So I put together something simple. I read it aloud, not dramatically, just clearly, the way you'd read meeting notes. The wedding expenditure, the joint account contributions, the $19,000 in transfers with the dates and the name of the account they went to. The fact that the account belonged to someone whose name Becca visibly recognized, because the color drained out of her face the moment I said it. By the time I finished, the table was completely silent. Becca said, in a very small voice, "Mom, you said that was handled." "It was handled," Rochelle said, but her voice had lost something. "With my money," I said, "without asking me." Walt looked at Rochelle. It was a long look, the kind that has years of history layered into it. "You used their account," he said. "Just that," quietly. "It was a family matter," Rochelle said. And this time, the sentence sounded different than it had on the phone. It sounded small. Scott, to his credit, said nothing. He was staring at the birthday card in the center of the table like it might offer an exit. Brennan reached under the table and put his hand over mine. That was the moment I understood what he'd decided. Not about the money, about the larger question of what kind of husband he intended to be when his mother and his wife were on opposite sides of something real. "We sent a repayment agreement," Brennan said to his mother. His voice was steady. "We need you to respond to it." Rochelle looked at him the way mothers look at sons when they realize the son has made a choice. "You're taking her side." "I'm taking the side that has the receipts," Brennan said. It wasn't a movie moment. There was no dramatic music, no tearful confessions, no throwing of napkins. Walt excused himself to get more water and didn't come back for 4 minutes, which I suspected was his version of weeping. Becca stared at the tablecloth. Rochelle sat with her spine very straight and said nothing more for the rest of the meal. We ate birthday cake. Walt blew out his candles. I helped clear the plates because that's still who I am, regardless of everything, and because Walt thanked me quietly in the kitchen and said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I should have paid more attention." That mattered to me. The legal process took 5 months. Rochelle retained her own attorney for approximately 3 weeks before the costs became prohibitive. In the end, a formal repayment agreement was signed. The terms were not the full $66,000. We settled on 48, paid out over 3 years, because I decided that getting something real was worth more than fighting for the perfect number. The insurance policies were reinstated through a different provider, one Brennan and I are not responsible for. Becca got a job, a real one, at a marketing agency in Seattle. She texted me about 4 months after the settlement to say she was sorry. It was a short text, a little awkward, and I believe it was genuine. I told her I appreciated it. We don't have the relationship I once hoped we'd have, but we don't have the one I feared either. Walt sends me fishing photos sometimes, catches he's proud of. I always respond. Rochelle and I do not speak often. When we are in the same room, we are civil, because there are only so many hours in a life, and I have chosen not to spend them on battles that are already over. She is who she is. I am not in her life the way I was, and that is, quietly, a relief. What changed most is Brennan. He is not a different person. He is the same person, with better information about what I need and what I will no longer absorb in silence. We went to couples counseling, the kind where you sit in an office with low lighting and a therapist who asks questions that sound simple and aren't. We talked about patterns, about what I had accommodated and what he had not seen because it was easier not to see it. He was honest in those sessions in a way that was harder to do than the letter or the dinner or any of the documented confrontations. Honesty in the small things, it turns out, is the harder thing. I still run my consulting business from the spare bedroom. I still work weekends sometimes, but I have a new rule. One I wrote down and taped to the inside of my office closet where only I can see it. The work is mine, the money is mine, and who I give it to is a choice I make with full information and full consent. Last spring, I attended a wedding for a college friend, a small ceremony in the backyard of her parents' house in Vermont. I was a guest, purely and simply, no coordinating, no funding, no logistics. When I arrived, my friend was standing near the entrance, and she grabbed my hand the moment she saw me and said, "You're at my table, obviously, right next to me." It was a folding chair with a paper nameplate. It was the best seat I have ever had. The folding chair with the paper nameplate at my friend's wedding in Vermont. That's the image I keep coming back to. Not the vineyard, not the ivory linens I selected, or the quartet I booked, or the champagne tower that everyone photographed and no one ever thanked me for. Just a folding chair, my name written on a small card in someone's ordinary handwriting. The simplest possible thing, and it meant more than any of it. I've thought a lot about why I let it go on as long as I did. The honest answer is that I confused generosity with worthiness. I believed, somewhere underneath all the spreadsheets and vendor calls and automatic payments, that if I gave enough, I would eventually earn a permanent place at the table. That's not generosity. That's a transaction dressed up as love, and the painful thing is that I was the one running that transaction. Rochelle didn't invent my compliance. I brought it with me and handed it over willingly because I thought that was what good people did. What I understand now is that real integrity isn't about how much you give. It's about whether the giving is honest, whether you're doing it from a place of actual choice or from fear of what happens if you stop. For years, I told myself I was being a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, a good member of a family that had taken me in. But underneath that story was a quieter, less comfortable truth. I was terrified that if I stopped being useful, I would stop being wanted. That's not a moral position. That's a survival strategy. And it was costing me in ways I hadn't fully added up. The night I sat at that cocktail bar with my sparkling water and scrolled through 6 months of bank statements, I wasn't acting on anger. I was acting on clarity. There's a difference, and it matters. Anger is reactive. Clarity is something you arrive at when you finally let yourself see the thing you've been working very hard not to see. I had the information, I understood what it meant, and I made a decision from that understanding, not from the feeling that came after. That's the part I'm most proud of, honestly. Not the canceled policies or the certified letter, or the moment Brennan said, "I'm taking the side that has the receipts." Those things felt satisfying, but satisfaction fades. What stays is the knowledge that I did it right. I verified before I acted. I consulted people who knew more than I did. I gave Brennan the chance to show me who he was before I decided what to do with that information. I didn't burn things down in the heat of a bad night. I waited until I was sure, and then I moved. That kind of steadiness, knowing what you know, holding it carefully, acting when the time is right and not a moment before, that's something nobody teaches you directly. You learn it by watching yourself get it wrong a few times first. I got it wrong for 3 years. I accommodated when I should have spoken. I filled gaps that weren't mine to fill. I absorbed what should have been addressed, and when I finally stopped, when I applied the same methodical attention to my own situation that I had been applying to everyone else's problems for years, the path forward was actually very clear. Brennan is still my husband. That surprises some people when I tell this story, but the reason it works now is exactly because of what broke, not the trust, which took a long time to rebuild, but the old arrangement. The one where I handled everything and expected nothing and hoped that would be enough. That arrangement is gone. In its place is something that required both of us to be honest about what we'd been doing and what we actually wanted. It's harder. It's also real. Walt still sends me fishing photos. I still respond to everyone.